Hello and welcome to another DGCAD Consulting Revit Building 8 A to Z training video, part 1, and we're working our way quite nicely down our list of topics inside of here. So we're right down to our grids, and I'm just throwing the help menu in on this one. We have to put this in with one of our videos, so we'll just include it with our grids. So grids are vertical datums, and they are three-dimensional, and they just cut vertically up and down, and objects lock to the grids just like they lock to our levels, and then we control them, and then we use dimensions to dimension between our grids and lock the dimensions, and then the grids will tie in and be constrained accordingly. We can also import a CAD file from another package such as AutoCAD or a DWG or a DGN format, DXF, and then we can use that geometry to create our own grids. And then we'll be talking about the help menu. We'll talk a little bit about columns, but mainly columns will be covered in our structural section down in here in our next section, which is columns, beams, braces, and down in there. So back in our ADT or in our Revit, we'll go into here, and I'm going to go File, New, and we'll start a new project and just use our basic template file. And we're going to go to our basic design bar over here, and we're just going to start to draw some grid lines. So I'm just going to pick some grid lines, and the size of the bubbles and everything will be according to our scale. So I can click on there, and if I want, I can go right off the bat inside there and type in a character like an A, and then hit enter and come out, and that'll put an A in there. And now this grid line here will be a B, and that will be a C. And then I can start this way, for instance. Notice I hit escape once to get out, and I stay within. This is what we call persistent or commands, where you stay in that same command all the time. Even though you escape once, you still drawing grids. Now I'm going to place that grid, and then I'm going to put the number 1 in there, and then this will be number 2, number 3, and number 4. So you can very quickly get your grid lines in there, and then once they're in, you can click on them, and then you can grab this and you can pull it. And usually grid lines all kind of talk to each other with the ends, unless you take this lock off here. This is locking it to there. If I take this lock off, then I can move that off. The 3D means the grid line is changing in 3 dimensions. So you'll notice everywhere that grid line shows up, if you take the 3D off, it goes to 2D. And then what happens is the change you make is only for this particular view. So sometimes you want your grid lines to behave differently in each view, and that's where you would go maybe to a 2D where you can control it independently rather than globally. Once you have your grid lines in there, you can quickly go in and just click on here, and each dimension you touch, and then you click nowhere, and then it places the dimension. If you click on the lock after you do any dimension and you grab an object and drag it, then of course it's going to move out with it. So that's the idea of locking that, and then because these ends are locked, this would go this way. If you put a further dimension from the end point of here, that would stretch that out. So now we can put some more dimensions, same type of thing on here. Place those, and then maybe we want to lock them all. Okay, that might not be a bad idea. Click on here, do the same thing. Grids are always locked, so that's it. They all kind of move together and in each direction. Now grids can also be angled. I can go in and click on a grid command, pick a point here, and then I can add grid lines in at whatever angle I want. Grid. Hit escape, click on the grid, and then I can grab my grip on the end here, grab all these grips on the end, pull them out. I can grab these, I can pull them out to here if I want. Okay, you can also go up to a grid and you can click on it, and you can hit the brake button, and then you can move these things around. Okay, if I grab this grip, it's still moving those grid lines up and down. Notice the dimensions are moving with it, and if I click this and bring it back, then my grid line gets back into one piece. Click on here again. So you've got your different grip points, and you've got your same If you don't want the bubble here, you can click on here and it just gets rid of the bubble. Okay, or I can go down here and put my grid bubble down on this side. Notice that my grid lines are solid lines instead of dashed or centered lines, and that's because of the property of the grid. I'm going to click on the property inside of here, and I'm going to go in. You can see there's the grid bubble it's using. There's the grid name I could change, and I'm going to go in here and I'm going to say, oh, not a solid line, which is a continuous line. We want a center line inside of there, okay? And then the grid bubble at both ends or not. Seen that inside there. And then there is the grid bubble. We use it, or we can say no bubble if we want, and we can go load some as well. More content inside of there. So then we can hit OK and OK. And then what happens now is our center lines are going to be there, and if we change our display to be 1 to 50, our center lines will change, and our grid bubbles and dimensions will also all update. So that's one of the nice things, of course, with this is the scale and size of our objects with that. And we can also go in and do a grid line that is an arc as well. We can do a grid line from here to here, and we can arc that out as we please. And then you just basically have an arced grid line, and then you can drag that around, do whatever you want with it, and you can dimension that as you please by clicking on here, putting a dimension in there quite nicely, and then locking that if you want, okay, and of course moving that in or out. We'll change that radius, or move the arc. Now we can also import a CAD file and use that line work. We can use, if we happen to have walls in this drawing already, it doesn't matter if the walls are in or if we import the information, but we can go in here and pick grid. Instead of drawing a grid line, we pick select, and then what that will do is that'll actually put a grid line in right on the line that we want. Maybe we want our grid bubbles there and not in there. Now I can click on this, and I've made basically, I'm going to use my tab button to cycle between the objects. When objects are on top of each other, you tab until you get the one you want, then you click it, then I can go in and grab this grip and I can pull that grid line out. Again, if I change my number here, it'll change the subsequent numbers, like all Revit tags. So we can go in and we can do line work by clicking on objects this way and adding our grid lines inside of here by going to this option, and we can also offset it by a number. For instance, I can offset it by 300 and then click on here. It's not doing my 300. There's my 300 there, so there's my grid lines offsetting by a certain distance as I pick the points. Okay, whenever you see these two options, you know that it's either draw a line or select the object. Quite often people overlook this one. It's underused, and you can use that to do a lot of stuff. So for instance, I'm going to import an AutoCAD file. I'm just going to go import a DWG file, and I'm going to pick a file that I have there. It's just a sketch. It's got some line work on it. And that file I just imported is right there. So I'm going to take that file and I'm just going to kind of move it over there. I can take this AutoCAD file and delete layers from there. I can do a fully explode and explode it into line work, or I can explode it partially, saving some blocks. But for the most part, all I'm going to do now is I'm going to use it to draw my grid lines, because I can grid line and I can snap to that AutoCAD geometry, or I can use this command which we saw earlier, click on there and maybe do some offsets of 1,000, so it gives me a bit of room off of my object, and we can go around, and even the arcs we can do. Okay, so I can click on there, and then after I get that in, I can grab this grid line. Oh, I hit the break button there, and I can stretch that down. Keep grabbing the wrong grid number, the grid grips. Okay, so once I have that in there, it's just a matter of gripping those, stretching those grid lines off, and then once I get those grid lines on there from this existing CAD file, I can click on here and I just simply delete it, and I'm ended up with my grid, and then I can go in and use my grips to do whatever I want with that. So using imported geometry to do your grids as well as line work. And just doing a little cleanup here, get rid of some of this stuff. And of course, when we look in our sections and our elevations, we will also see our grid lines, and again with our 3D grid, grip and stretch that. So elevations and sections and plans all showing our grids. And then of course when we draw our objects and we draw our walls, we place those on there, and then we would lock those as well as we place that wall right on the grid. And again, when we place our wall, remember you can pick the surface that you want that wall on, and then you would just take that and you would align that and lock it with that, and then your grid would do all your control. So just to finish off here a little bit on the help menu, when you click on help, there's some really good information on obviously the F1 button in the main help, but there's a very good document called Getting Started, and quite often we get people who want to follow up this training with a hard copy or some documentation of this training. And if you go into here and you click on the Getting Started, the Getting Started will bring up a PDF document, and inside of here it's got some really good information when you can click down here and follow up and supplement this training video with reading through this document and some of the tutorials and information. Very valuable documentation here on a lot of, well, pretty much everything I'm going to be covering here, and you can go down and view it however you want as a PDF document. So we've got that Getting Started. We've got some actual tutorials that you can open up and you can follow through, and then it will use the same tutorial files that I've been using here, as in when you go File and you hit Open, and then you use the training files folder on the left, the shortcut. And then there's some really good documents on the web, and there's some great websites that you can also get Revit information from that way. So when we go into the Revit Help menu, we can just go into the regular Revit Help, and in particular we're looking at grids right now. So I'm going to go to Index, and I'm just going to type in grid, and then we have the grid commands and adding grids and the shapes and changing and using grids. There's some interesting information about display control of grids and how it relates to what is a scope box if you choose. So something you might also want to supplement with your grid training grids is to go through this help menu into the scope box or into the grids under display, and just kind of read up on these topics and how this particular object type scope box affects the visibility of datum points, being grids and reference planes and level lines. And in general, the Revit Help menu and help facilities here are second to none. So if you do take the time to go through all of the documentation, there is in here and available with some great diagrams and animations explaining the program.